do Economics and Politics Research Group. Nós estamos muito felizes de recebê-los aqui. Nós vamos começar, que estamos um pouquinho atrasados, então eu vou convidar para compor a mesa o embaixador do Japão, o senhor Teiji Hayashi. Chefe do Departamento de Economia da Universidade de Brasília, professor Marcelo Torres. E a professora Helena Eli Shimizu, professora do Departamento de Saúde Coletiva da Universidade de Brasília. Embaixador Hayashi, a sua palavra.
Boa tarde a todos. Primeiro, eu gostaria de cumprimentar a professora, também a professora Helena Smith, mais professores, também os participantes aqui presentes. Vou ser breve, né? A honra e prazer hoje receber doutora Urabe e professor Funabashi aqui em Brasília. Vou contar um pouco uma anedota, né? Doutora Urabe é meu colega da escola do ensino médio e estudamos já mais de 40 anos atrás juntos, né, na mesma escola. Mas já conhecia que a doutora Urabe é uma filha de um economista eminente, Hirobumi Uzawa, que estava, né, muitos japoneses esperavam um prêmio Nobel para esse economista japonês Hirobumi Uzawa. Mas, além disso, esse professor, né, criou uma filosofia, né, uma teoria social comum capital em inglês, ou seja, capital comum social, que vai explicar hoje, né, essa ideia. Mas basicamente social common capital foi uma ideia muito avançada, né, nesse sentido e pronosticava a situação de hoje. Por exemplo, no caso do Brasil, agora, né, enfrentamos vários desafios como mudanças climáticas, desigualdade social, problema de segurança medical, entre outras coisas, né? E essa ideia, né, de economista Hirobumi Uzawa oferece algumas como soluções ou chaves de resolver vários problemas que temos hoje, tanto no Brasil como no nosso país, Japão, né? Então, eu pedi minha amiga, a Mari Uzawa, né, trazer seus colegas para difundir essa ideia a capital social comum. E eu acho que é muito oportuno, porque agora, né, no Brasil, temos essa cúpula de G20, onde combate contra a fome e pobreza é um dos temas principais. Também nessa manhã, né, estive em Itamaraty para a preparação de COP30 do ano que vem, em Belém. Então, é mudança climática, né? E também as pessoas que estão aqui presentes, né, estão olhando a situação de fumaças ou incêndios, né, aqui perto da Brasília. Então, eu espero que essa conferência, a palestra, sirva para, né, dar algumas ideias ou compartilhar esses nossos, né, sentimentos sobre esses desafios de hoje. Então, agradeço mais uma vez esta oportunidade, esta palestra, à Universidade de Brasília e também aos participantes aqui presentes. Muito obrigado. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Professor Marcelo Torres.
Hi, dear all. I'd like to say that I'm too honored to be here and that you are all more than welcome. Ashi, the Japanese ambassador, for being here. I also really appreciate the presence of our speakers, Dr. Urabe, Dr. Funabashi, to be willing to talk a little bit about the notion behind social common capital. We are very honored and proud to be able to host this seminar here and organized by the Kyoto University Research Institute here, FASI, which is our college here. In cooperation, actually, of course, in cooperation with several actors, the Economics Department of the University of Brasilia, the Economics and Politics Research Group, and the Uzawa Kokusai Gakan Institute. I also would like to thank my colleagues from the Economics Department, Professor Bernardo and Professor Mauricio, and from the College of Public Health, Professor Helena Schmidt. Have a nice, interesting discussion after finally, I'd like to make an additional remark by saying that we from the Economics Department are very fortunate to have Mauricio here. He spent a great deal of time to help organize this event and spend, in general, a great deal of time organize our extensive agenda of seminars. Not an easy task. And again, you're all welcome, and I'm eager to know a little bit more about social common capital. Thank you.
Professora Helena Miso.
Good afternoon, everybody. And my colleagues from Faculty of Economics, and I hope we have a very productive afternoon to discuss such a relevant presentation. We have a big problem in Brazil, the fire all of the country. The planetary question is so important for us. In my area, there is a global bioethics that discuss a planetary question. Thank you.
Now I invite you all to sit there so we can enjoy the next presentation. Do you prefer to stay here or to sit there? We prepare for the next presentation. I would like to say thanks to Corecon DF. Thanks to Corecon, we'll be able to broadcast this on their web page, and it will be available on YouTube. It's being broadcasted on the Corecon YouTube page. Muito obrigado, Corecon DF também. Now I would like to invite Professor Marie Uzawa Urabe. She's going to make a presentation first.
Thank you very much for this. I'd like to start my express. Warm welcome and support. Additionally, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Ambassador Fu. Valuable cooperation and gathering truly special. Of Hirofumi Uzawa and practicing medicine as a physician. I like to talk the theory of social common capital developed by my late father, the economist Hirofumi Uzawa, effect of capitalism, such as widening inequality and the global warming, are becoming increasingly evident. Economic theory of social common capital is gaining attention for its potential to overcome these issues. This presentation, I will explain social common capital, its origin, and its relationship with medicine. Social common capital might be a new concept for many of you. Definition of social common capital is like this: provides members of a society with those services and the institutional arrangements that are crucial in maintaining human and cultural life. Simply put, minimum requirements for sustainable and affluent society. Subdivision of social common capital is divided in three. First, nature environment, air, water, food, and etc. Second, social infrastructure like electricity or road, water supply, and etc. And the third, we need institutional capitals like medicine and education. Since these are necessary for everyone, leaving them solely to market forces would lead to rising prices and will lead to expansion of economic disparities. The fundamental idea of social common capital is to minimize the disparities. Let's see the features of social common capital. Everybody depends on it. Demand is uninterrupted. It could be hard to generate profit. Private ownership are often permitted. Despite being such important things, rarely makes profit from them. In case of medicine, under the Japanese healthcare system, it cannot be economically viable if there are no patients. Hospitals will no longer be financially feasible when we create the ultimate goal of healthcare, a society where everyone is healthy and happy. And despite being such important things, another significant feature is the private ownership is allowed. For example, 70% of hospitals in Japan are private. During COVID-19, the government provided a free testing and treatment system, and its implementation was left to each region and hospitals. Centralized management makes it difficult to operate according to the characteristics of each location, where a city or a rural area. Considering operation tailored to the region's characteristics means that being private has a significant influence. I would like to talk about medicine as a social common capital. One of the essential pillars of social common capital. It is not fundamentally a service. Instead, it is fiduciary duty. I am having practiced clinically for over 30 years. I have never encountered someone who truly wanted to die. But unfortunately, everyone has to die. So that meaning medicine will pay some point if the medicine is a service. But we have something to do if medicine is fiduciary duty and the situation is not the patient wants. Speaking of the value of hospital is existence. If professionals managing with high ethics standard and knowledge, the sense of security that comes from being able to go to a hospital when something happens cannot be measured monetary terms. This is a picture of the previous emperor of Japan. When Uzawa spoke about the social common capital to the emperor, he became unusually nervous. But Emperor Showa provided some encouraging words. Uzawa's pursuit of economics was about creating a society that values human hearts. Economics is for well-being. Uzawa was trying to establish economics for well-being. And this is a photo, 1981, when Uzawa spoke with the Pope. I want to introduce a conversation with the Pope. This was for the century's anniversary, 100th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, issued in 1891. Uzawa participated as an advisor for this occasion. The Rerum Novarum new encyclical is a significant document from the Pope that addresses essential matters. Pope Leo XIII's era, because of the Industrial Revolution, he worried about the rise of socialist fantasies among workers. Pope Leo thought that something needed to be done about these social issues. An encyclical titled The Abuses of Capitalism and the Illusion of Socialism. This groundbreaking encyclical urged the Church not only to spread the Christianity, but also to address social issues. In commemoration of the 100 years since this encyclical was issued, Pope John Paul II decided to issue a new encyclical, and Uzawa was invited to be an advisor. The subtitle Uzawa proposed in 1981 was The Abuses of Socialism and the Illusion of Capitalism. Notably, this was the year the Soviet Union collapsed. For these 100 years, society is swinging back and forth between capitalism and socialism, and not succeeded to create affluent society. Now, I would like to briefly reflect on the life of Uzawa. He was invited as a professor to the University of Chicago when he was 36 years old. At the University of Chicago, with ample research funding, Uzawa was able to conduct summer seminars with outstanding students selected from across the United States. Among these members were Professor Stiglitz, whom I mentioned earlier, and George Akerlof. There were graduate students at MIT and win the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2001. They mentioned that there is no other place where people proficient in mathematics and economics could gather like this. It was a delightful research life. At that same time, the University of Chicago was also the stronghold of neoliberalism. The central figure was Milton Friedman, who became famous for his book, Free to Choose. He said that economic freedom is crucial with minimal government intervention. He believed that the societal equilibrium would naturally be achieved if the market was left alone. However, the freedom discussed was limited to choices like whether to buy or not to buy. Take education, for example. Friedman said that there are few Black college students because they choose to play rather than study during high school. However, there is a Black student raised his hand and said, I didn't have the freedom to choose my parents, leaving Friedman speechless. The fact that educational disparities are directly linked to the economic inequality is widely understood today. However, it is very concerning that Friedman's market fundamentalist view remains mainstream, where everything is a matter of personal responsibility. While Uzawa enjoyed a very fruitful research life in the United States, he returned to Japan in 1968, with significant factor being the Vietnam War and other issues. When Uzawa returned to Japan, it was during a period of high economic growth with remarkable progress evident in the numbers. However, he saw in front of him was Japan, which had lost its sense of richness and equality. The growth had come at the expense of the weak. The photo in upper right shows a patient with fetal Minamata disease, victim of industrial pollution. They suffered from organic mercury poisoning due to mercury being directly discharged into the sea. For a long time, the government did not acknowledge the responsibility of the companies, and the victims suffered for many years. Adults experienced severe neurological damage. Particularly tragic was the case of fetal Minamata disease, where organic mercury accumulated in the fetuses, even though the mothers were healthy. Mother's sorrow was immense. This was a time when economic growth was prioritized, ignoring such tragedies. That's why Uzawa tried to establish economic theory, social common capital. Recently, it translated in Korean and Chinese. Also, this was his book in 2006, Economic Analysis of Social Common Capital. This is filled with math. My father told me he used rather easy math, but unfortunately, I cannot understand any of them. However, I recently understand why Uzawa wanted to preserve his work in mathematics. Mathematics is a communication tool unaffected by language, culture, religion, or time. I would like to talk about proportional carbon tax. This approach also leverages the advanced mathematics my father loved. In this book, it advocates for the introduction of carbon taxes or environmental taxes as a measure to combat global warming. However, as you may know, 3/4 of housewarming gases are emitted by developed countries.
taxing a certain amount per ton would impose a heavy burden on countries that are still in the process of developing. This is where the concept of proportional carbon tax comes into play. It is a proportion tax to stuff like national income and the percentage of tropical rainforest ownership, and so on. Oh, my figure disappeared for some reason. Thus, the estimate takes into account economic disparities. It is clear that the issue of tropical rainforest should not be left solely to Brazil, just because the problem is within its borders. The people around the world who benefit from these rainforests should come together, contribute resources, and work collectively to address the issue. Briefly, I would like to introduce the research division of social common capital and the future at the Kyoto University is trying to go beyond capitalism with social common capital. Next presentation will be by Professor Funabashi. I think theory of social common capital is a platform for the discussion and management towards sustainable and affluent society. We only realize its value after losing by war or disaster. I believe that most important social common capital is peace. Uzawa was known as an economist with a warm heart and a cool head. I'm happy to have shared Uzawa's idea with you today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Uzawa. I would like to invite Professor Masatoshi Funabashi. He's going to make his presentation.
Okay, thanks for the introduction, and hello everyone, good afternoon. I'm Masatoshi Funabashi, working on biodiversity and food production, important part of social common capital, and more generally, I'm creating how human activities, economic activities, actually promote biodiversity instead of destroying. I'd like to start with this picture of the world map, which shows with a gradient how much biodiversity is lost in the world. So the red region where there's a severe loss of biodiversity, and green regions are where it is intact. So as you can see, as long as there's a human settlement or agriculture activities going on, there's a constant loss of biodiversity, and it's been so since the dawn of history, not only modern time, but since the dawn of agriculture, especially food production has been impacting much of our ecological state. And recently we have the forecast that in 20 or 30 years, our our environmental role would exceed, well, actually some of the important pillars are already exceeding in terms of agricultural cycles, but all of them would exceed in 2050, for example. And if it happens, our economy, which is basically embedded in our natural environment or ecosystem cycles, can no more assure the support for the production, such as land, biological resources, and clean water and air and so on. So the market structure will collapse if we exceed all these boundaries of material cycle. And we are expecting the global collapse of ecosystems. Here in Brazil, we have the deforestation of Amazonian rainforest, which is affecting worldwide global ecological state. So the rainforest is turning into savanna, and then savanna would further degrade into grassland or desertified land. And this diagram shows that before 2050, there could be a global collapse of ecosystem, that we can no more guarantee the same functioning of ecosystem. There will be not sufficient recycling of water or air as a natural ecosystem. So we don't have yet the global solution. As Hirofumi Uzawa predicted, our capitalistic society is increasing our economic wealth in an exponential manner, but it's already exceeding our planetary boundaries. And we can not really continue this way. So what we should advocate is to change this trajectory into some kind of sigmoidal state that fit within the planetary boundaries. But we don't have really the silver bullet for that. Technological innovation cannot realize totally this kind of sigmoidal growth. The only thing that we can expect this kind of stationary state is the regeneration of ecosystem and making use of the biological resource from the ecosystems. So what we have in mind, what I have in mind is to not only to count on the technological innovation, but to couple it with the ecosystem cycles and somehow putting a shift to the renewable use of ecosystem cycle. And in order to achieve that, we have to change the current trajectory of food production from large-scale intensified monoculture into diversified small-scale farming. And actual demography shows that there's a huge discrepancy between farmers. And of course, if we put forward the economic principles, we tend to intensify the monoculture method in larger surface. It's happening in Brazil. But we actually leave those people who are left behind such innovation, who remains in the lower economic sector, and who are actually important actors for the biodiversity conservation. And if you look at the figure from FAO, all these smallholders cultivating on less than 5 hectares is just occupying about 90% or more of agricultural holdings by numbers, not by surface, but agricultural holdings by number is occupied mostly by these smallholders. So in order not to leave anyone behind and achieve a sustainable and affluent lifestyle in the future based on the ecosystem cycle, we have to really target all these smallholders, and that's my project in ecoculture is working on. So the basic principle is to create the ecosystem. And surprisingly enough, food production doesn't start usually from creating ecosystem. Rather, it's destroy the ecosystem to get the yield of monoculture crop. But my system on ecoculture starts from associating many useful plant species, almost 200 edible plant species on a small surface of 1,000 square meters, for example, and try to create a rich and bountiful ecosystem from which we can yield substantial commodities, so the food components and other ecosystem services that are all producing synergies. So let's look at a more in a more temporal development of how it works. And here I'm showing the so-called ecological succession of natural ecosystems. So It's starting from the bare land, in which there's origination of grassland, shrubland, and then the forest, which saturates to climax forest. This is the case of Japanese climate. So here we stop whether in the savanna or rainforest state. And the idea of Shineko culture is to make use of this self-organization, which we don't need any input. There's no externality, there's only positive externalities for the environment. And add many useful species, principally plant species, like agricultural crops, medicinal herbs, and other for the material of construction, and manage the whole complexity so that it will self-organize and continue producing even after a continuous harvest. So there's an intricate balance between the self-organization of ecosystem and how we make use of them. And since I have my background in biology and physics, I made this kind of model. I cannot get into details today. There's a publication if you are interested as a mathematician. But actually, it shows that this kind of polycultural, mixed polycultural method, creating ecosystem, performs always better than the monoculture system. And the only reason why we cannot go for this mixed polyculture system is that we rely on a private company to make profit out of production. If we have to control the ecosystem, of course, it's much easier to control the monoculture. It's much easier to buy the inputs, fertilizers, chemicals, and assure the constant output as crops. So that's the basic business strategy of the company, especially private companies. But government-wise, or as a matter of fact, if food production should be retaken as social common capital, we have a lot of leveraging point with mixed polyculture method. And of course, there's difficulty that we human couldn't handle all this complexity, except for this time, we have the power of big data and AI that we can make use of them to leverage our knowledge on the ecosystem and eventually master the ecological organization. And this shows an example of the system that we developed in Sony Computer Science Lab. And the left picture is our actual field. It contains actually 200 edible plant species throughout the year. And in order to manage all this complexity, we observe what kind of species are living together, and then analyze its interactions and try to enhance these interactions, further introducing new crop species. So the system will tell you what kind of crop species you can further introduce to strengthen all these interactions to make the culture more stable, more productive, and more resilient. So on. So this is a completely different from the monoculture method. And of course, we can make use of the drone picture to globally assess which part is still lacking in biodiversity or which part is sufficiently managed that we can go for the harvest. Or the thing that was useful during the COVID-19 is that we are making the 3D model using the drone image so that we can communicate in distance and make advice and consultation for better management. And we did that between Japan and Ecuador, for example, using this 3D model. Okay, so this system is working in small scale, and if we map all the smallholders with the hotspot of biodiversity, which is shown in red, we see the priority regions that this kind of silviculture method should be prioritized as a life support for the society. And I'll be talking some of the significant examples from here. And first thing started in Burkina Faso in the Sahel. It's in Africa, in the south of Sahara. This is the real picture I took near the site. And there's a desertification going on. And this is half due to climate change and half due to the human deforestation, or in the traditional farming, it's quite destructive for the local ecosystem. So what we did is to acquire the abandoned land, which was a desertified land, and introduced the mixture of 150 edible plant species with a local NGO. And after 3 years, we had this really contrastive difference. So the left is a control plot that we didn't do nothing. So in the dry region, there's no regeneration of plant. And in the rainy season, there's a heavy rain that wash away the surface soil. So throughout the year, there's no regeneration on the left side. And on the right side, there's a rich establishment of multi-layered vegetation. And from this, we had really rich harvest. So this is the statistics of the harvest after 3 years of this experiment, the first experiment in Burkina Faso. And it was really impressive that only 10 square meter of aquaculture farm could produce the minimum wage in terms of the absolute poverty threshold by selling this product in local market. We are not exporting, we are just running the local economy. It's a kind of indigenous growth. And we didn't put any input like fertilizer or chemicals. And this is quite impressive. It's almost 2 magnitudes larger than that has been previously reported by FAO in the same region. And it can constitute a real life support in such a place that poverty and desertification prevail. And there's an impressive story of even peace building is that, okay, this region is roamed by the terrorists, and especially young people become terrorists because there's no means to earn money. And there's a time that one of our staff was kidnapped, and the terrorists asked us to pay 200 euro worth money in local currency. So 200 euros is such a great amount for them. But actually, this farm can produce, if you work in this farm, you can produce 200 euros within 2 weeks. So instead of doing military intervention, which French government is doing, we are trying to hire local youngsters and preventing them from being terrorists, but rather becoming a really productive farmer that can also establish local environment. And the good news is that this kind of mixed polyculture can produce a lot of variety of crops, including some varieties of staples, and which constitute a major part of something called planetary health diet. So this is a kind of food system that is a bit different from today's conventional food system, but which relies much on vegetable product and less on the red meat in order to lessen the impact of food production, and also for our longevity and other suppression of chronic disease. And the good news is that about 2/3 of this plate could be produced by this aquaculture system. So this makes the perfect match between the small village, small aquaculture farms, planetary health diet, and gradually revegetize this desertified land into rich forest and make it viable, sustainable, and a friendly society. So I'm going there almost every year to run the international symposium with all these African brothers. They are very enthusiastic. I appreciate the support of actually the Japanese government. I'm not showing the logo here, but Japanese embassy greatly supported our activities. And today we are forming the citizen network with university professors and local NGOs for the establishment of platform for the knowledge sharing, so that in each location they can start autonomous leaders in aquaculture farms. So it's extending to 30 countries now. And we are also aiming for the technological leverage, is that when there's economic growth, of course, we want to automatize all these things, but in the way that doesn't lose the ecological complexity. So with Waseda University, we are developing this kind of intelligent robot that works under the solar panel. So we can put the solar panel in the desert, making the shade environment on which we can introduce aquaculture farms and doing the harvest by robotics. powered by the solar energy and producing a bunch of knowledge to better manage this kind of complex ecosystems. Okay, so here is another example in another continent, which is actually here in Ecuador. We had the project of originating the cacao farm. And you may be aware of the European regulation that we can no more cut down trees in Latin America to extend the cacao production. So we are obliged to stay in the same place, in the same cacao tree, but it's gradually decreasing its productivity because it's monoculture method. So what we did is to introduce, it's not to cut down the cacao trees, but further introduce multiple crops and produce together and cut off the fertilizer, which sounds crazy, but it worked. So we didn't lose the productivity of cacao. We rather had external additional harvest that was quite productive, of course, but that was served for the local people working at the farm. So the crazy thing is that never the exploitation company thought about the livelihood of the workers there. They just wanted the output as cacao, so how many tons of cacao they produce, and they never cared about their life support. So what we did is to set the mutual goals for not only cacao production, but for the well-being of the workers there. And it was quite possible to realize both. So it's not something which was in the trade-off, even in the past. It's just we didn't realize that the ecosystem has such a multifunctionality that we can take both productivity for the cash crop and other crops. And we didn't have the institutional idea to connect between multiple stakeholders, exporters, workers, and local ecosystem. Another example is in Indonesia. So I'm talking about this example because it's somewhat relevant to the Amazonian rainforest. So it's quite far in a different country, but we worked with WWF for the rehabilitation of the slope, where we had some crops there, but not much, and which also overlaps with the habitat of Sumatran tiger. So it's a kind of small tiger, but it's a tiger, so it's a carnivorous animal, and it's endangered species. So if we leave this kind of slope degraded, there are less habitat for the tigers and less productivity for the villagers, and people are running into cities and never come back. So there's only abandoned land left. So we want to reproduce the ecological productivity, all the way keeping the best condition for the Sumatran tiger and also for the local people's livelihood. And what we are doing is to examine the existing structure, which is the multi-layer canopy structure of the rainforest, and think about the possible additional species that we can introduce. And this should be something like edible, useful plants in order to make income for the villagers. So we use the same system that I introduced for the with a network image, and retrieved from the database what kind of crops we can further introduce. And it can actually make a huge difference in terms of species diversity and also the canopy structure. And what we are doing is that compares to the natural state and traditional rubber plantation, which is in trade-off between the complex canopy structure that mitigates the heavy rain and the number of species that is the source of economic productivity. We start somewhere in between and gradually goes to win-win situation. So more edible crop species introduced, but without losing the canopy structure, which is essential for the functioning of rainforest. So we want to go from left downside to right upper side. Yeah, and this is our last symposium with Kyoto University that we had. We had similar symposium on social common capital with the University of Indonesia, and we talked much on the intersection with food production and healthcare. Especially healthcare is important issues, And yeah, we had great time. Okay, so I want to move on the urban environment, the city environment. I was a member of this World Economic Forum committee last year and contributed to this report that revealed that urban infrastructure has really great economic risk if it not replaced the concrete structure into green infrastructure, and which is underinvested, of course. So instead of counting on technology, we have to count on the mitigation and functionality of natural ecosystem, such as in the riverbank, or even for the building, we will have the cooling effect with by planting trees alongside or even on the vertical wall. And then we have to introduce this kind of green infrastructure massively in the city in order to reduce the risk of natural disaster. And what we did in Tokyo is to use this kind of rooftop garden in Roppongi, at the side of Roppongi skyscraper, and create this kind of really diverse garden to test the hypothesis how biodiversity could contribute to mitigate such risk of rain and extreme heat, and yeah, so multiple functionality that are supported by biodiversity. And what we did as the technological side is to go from simple conservation of flagship species to general keystone species. So you may be aware of the flagship species such as panda and tigers, and so Sumatran tiger is a kind of flagship species, which is of course an important species, but only describe a part of the functioning of complex ecosystems. But it's easy to invest, so we can collect money. But what actually happening is rather on the right side, there's a really complex network, and there's a network hub working as central species. So we call that keystone species, which are really important. And we have to invest more on this general keystone species, but it's not very attractive. It could be earthworm. It could be some microbial species. It could be really nasty species from the outlook, but that's important for ecosystem. So what we did is to analyze the GIS data of the existing green infrastructure and the surrounding district of Tokyo, and resolve all this conflict of diversity. So we want our rooftop garden to be diverse, but at the same time, differently diverse from the surrounding ecosystem, because different diversity promote synergistic effect in terms of ecosystem. And also, it should be diverse in terms of interactions. Not only we count up the species, but we have to count up the interaction that are involved. And this kind of triple conflict is quite difficult to resolve by human mind. So we relied on the computation. And we had a very good solution, still heuristic, but we numerically resolved it and implementing such best solution into the real world. And the result we had, well, it's only some section of the result we had on the soil or microbial diversity, is that even if it is on the rooftop in the middle of Tokyo, we had really high activity and diversity of soil microbial activities, even compared with other rural and natural environment. So this is something new, because we tend to think we have to go into nature or we have to move into rural area to have better access to nature's profit, like more biodiversity of soil microbial life that promote our health and so on. But actually, even in the middle of the urban rooftop, we can create this kind of environment. And we also did the analysis of the product. This is the tea product made out of the snake-culture plot. And this is showing a complex pathways of metabolic biochemical pathways. We are using it for the molecular biological analysis. And it shows principally that there's a lot more health protective compound overexpressed in snake culture compound compared to the monoculture product. So when there's a lot of interaction between species, there are communicating chemicals that simultaneously serve as health protective compound in our body. That's a miracle of evolution, and we are making use of this rich compound diversity to combine with local healthcare system. This is collaboration with rehabilitation center of elderly patient in Japan. It's near Tokyo, and we created this kind of rich snake culture garden in which we did exercise, physical and mental exercise with this elderly patient who are in rehabilitation after the stroke or even having dementia and so on. And we had a really drastic recovery from the, even compared to other systems, we had better recovery rate, both physically and mentally. So we have this integrated model how biodiversity contributes to our health state, and in cooperation with other companies, we are providing this kind of compound service that we first assess the state of degradation of biodiversity in a given environment, and we will increase the biodiversity with useful plant species, so going from left to right in the downside, then making use of them, whether directly drinking tea or eating the agricultural product, or even using the environment itself to do some exercise or just enjoy the clean air filled with beneficial microbes and so on. So which is from the bottom to the top arrow on the right side, and making the real support of healthcare anchored by the environment. And we are also making this kind of education toolkit, which is called Snake Portal. I don't know if S is erased, but it's a kind of minimum unit that you can create by yourself as a first-person experience. So you can associate many species in this kind of large, relatively large planter, and put it everywhere you want to make eventually the ecological network that you can actually observe. And we are running this education program with several schools, children in Japan. Okay, so so far I've just quickly introduced what's possible with snake culture in food production, in healthcare, and also in education. And as a generalization, I'm trying to establish the concept of augmented ecosystem or human augmentation of ecosystem. So the natural ecosystem on the left side is just following the ecological succession, which is, of course, as we know it, the best state of biodiversity so far. But on the right side, if human investment of materials and energy could promote further this cycle, this could be another form of anthropogenic ecosystem that are useful, productive, at the same time maintaining essential functionality to sustain, even including the natural world. So this is something that we have to really promote as a form of activity, that technological innovations coupled with ecological cycles, and that would, I hope, eventually realize the sigmoidal endogenous growth. And in this Nature Partner Journal paper I published, I even ran the basic supply-demand analysis on the augmentation scenario, and it shows instead of investing on simple protection or conservation, you have to aim for certain part of the conservation effort. You have to invest rather on the augmentation. You have to actively intervene in the ecological cycle to make it more productive and more diverse. And this is more cost-effective in the sense that we can analyze from this supply-demand curve. As I look at the Dasgupta report, and Dasgupta is one of the disciples of Uzawa Hirofumi, and he says, in order to maintain our economic exponential growth and its environmental load within 1 Earth's capacity, we have to really boost the innovation, technological innovation. But Dasgupta himself says, if we calculate this increase, necessary increase of innovation, it becomes 3.3-fold of the historical value. And he says it's almost impossible. It's not realistic, and we have to go for other scenarios to really achieve this reduction of environmental footprint. And what I try to simulate here is the case of augmentation scenario. So nature positive solution that a part of our investment will go to regenerate the ecosystem cycle and regenerate the natural capital and natural environment. And in this scenario, if we can invest from 2 to 4% of our economic value, such as GDP, into nature positive scenario, we can fairly achieve without changing the innovation rate, without increasing the innovation index. Okay, so I want to wrap up in relation to the social common capital, and I'm rather calling it as natural social common capital because it involves massively the natural world. And what we see here on the right side is the capital for society, which is usually called as simply capital in economic theories. And what I introduced in this presentation is something that we can call capital for nature, which is not making completely part of the economic theory, but it's been analyzed and studied intensively in the last 50 years by ecological studies. And it's different from natural capital because natural capital is without doubt the capital for society, something that we can exchange and put values as a good. And while the capital for nature that I show here is something that serves for the development of natural environment or natural organization without any interest from human society. And recent estimate on ecosystem services, which overlaps with the capital for nature and of course capital for society, shows there's like 125 to 145 trillion US dollars compared to the actual world GDP 105 trillion US dollars. In this figure, the blue circle is underrepresented, and it shows how much the natural environment is important to sustain our market economy. And what I think is that social common capital exists in between. And it is creating actually the mutual platform to mitigate or raise the market externalities by harmonizing the market and institutional mechanism so that the natural world and human world can coexist together. So I'm promoting this research within Sony Group, Kyoto University, and I also run the venture company Sineco Inc. myself in collaboration with lots of stakeholders worldwide, including some NGOs we established in Africa. So we hope we could have a good discussion and the extension of such a view. And I would like to thank the whole collaborators. And I guess there are some people looking on YouTube. So if you want to dig deep into scientific aspect, here are some Nature Partner Journal papers that I published. So you can take a look at it, and very welcome for the question. And I appreciate for your kind attention. Thank you.
Supposed to have a 10-minute break now, but we are a little behind schedule. Shall we continue? Hi, Professor Urabe, Professor Marcelo, Professor Eli, Professor Bernardo. Now the time came for discussions. So start with Professor Bernardo and Marcelo, but then we'll take questions from the pool, from you, comments, questions, clarifications. Please feel free to raise your hands. Who wants to start? Ladies first. Professora Helena.
I'd like to say thank you for your presentation. And I am a nurse. I work at Department of Collective Health. Then this issue, particularly important for economic model. Then I pass the okay.
Yes, so I came up with a couple of questions here that I think are really relevant. They're kind of broader. Economics, we deal with capital all the time. Capital. And that's one of not only the physical capital that we usually discuss, but the relationship between those three types of capital that we mentioned. Talking about like several types of capital here. Changed by taking into account altogether the importance of this, and it's pretty. And then, like in this context, my question for everybody actually, and for us too. Kind of, we're talking about like a building artificial and institutional capital, or building or preserving the natural capital, like expensive. Economists be talking about like how we're going to pay for that. We know that given the public good nature, so we're talking about like this type of capital, they are public good nature. Like really, once they are there, it's really hard to exclude people from the consumption. And once they start to consume, start to say, okay, a little bit of road for you, a little bit for road for you, a little bit of road for you. One road for everybody. Yeah. And you know that in this type of goods, yes, textbook, my students here might say that they're supplied by private markets tend to be inefficient. And usually they supply inefficiently low amount of this type of capital. Private sector. Right here? Yeah, sorry. And so the textbook solution we have usually is what? Is to either provide them by private but regulated suppliers, yeah, or by the government itself. Either way, the upfront investment costs are huge, and the government must usually be a crucial partner of this financing. So either if you decide that this social common capital, I'm talking about Brazil, that we really need. So if you so the government must step up, even if you decide that the private sector is going to provide a lot of money up front. Okay, so either way, the upfront investment costs are huge, and the government must usually be a crucial part of this financing. In tightly resource countries, developing countries like Brazil, for example, have a huge debt in infrastructure and capital, in all types of and you just have an Amazon and Cerrado to take care of it. a bit harder, I think, to say the least, in this context. So what, I mean, like for you too, so for you too, guys. So what would be the main advice for developing countries? I mean, you think, particularly Brazil, to speed up the implementation of SCC? Talk about like our lack of infrastructure in every sense, but how we really come up with ideas and ways of implementing this quantities and qualities. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback, and very clear that economic values that are both sustained by private companies and government are two extreme important poles in modern day economics. And it is also true that it's truly expensive to go out of this competition regime or regulation regime because we don't have experience. We don't know how to do it. We don't know how to incentivize people. But at the same time, there's an interesting story that European economists who studied the tragedy of commons traveled in Southeast Asia, and they didn't see the tragedy at all. It was like how we can say the management of commons didn't run or didn't collapse into the tragedy. It was rather harmonious and cooperative, which we also have some impressive examples in Japan. In the mountainside, there's something called community building or community space that we can put anything we want, like food or other commodities that we had, excess harvest and so on. And other members can freely have access and make use of it. And this resource never depletes, to my surprise, because if you do that in Tokyo, it will disappear in one night, but not in the mountainside community. So I'm wondering why this kind of morality or ethics or cultural system emerged spontaneously. And I read some articles of Professor Bernardo talking about everything everywhere all at once, talking about the coevolution of cultural system and institutional system. And this is a coevolution. So it's not like you can guarantee, okay, there's this culture, you can make this institution, or okay, we make this regulation, so such and such cooperative culture would emerge. It's more like chicken and the egg problem. But it does exist such beautiful harmony between the cultural ethics coupled with good institutional or good regulation, or even involving local governments and private sectors. So yeah, I may ask Professor Bernardo, what would be this kind of spontaneous condition that such good institution would emerge in your coevolutionary theory?
Okay. Well, that's basically the whole point is that in a lot of this literature where people talk about institutions, it's very common that people will recognize that institutions are important. And then as a policy recommendation, they'll come and say, well, then you have to improve institutions. And that's it. But that's the whole point. Institutions are not designed. Douglas North, the way he defined institutions was institutions are the humanly devised restrictions on socioeconomic, political things that people do. But they're humanly devised doesn't mean that they're designed, because it's a complex system. Everything's institutions are emergent property of a complex system. So that means there's no easy solutions. You just can't design it. That's why I liked a lot this literature, this research that you're doing. I like this component of complex systems that it has. So let me just go on with a question about this. I was very impressed by the program you did with the cynical culture where you get a piece of land, a relatively small piece of land. I'm repeating this because maybe people didn't get the whole thing. So what he does, he gets a piece of land, small piece of land, nothing, not a special piece of land or anything. And then they plant something like 200 species. So it's sort of crazy when you think of that. That's not how we do things, right? You usually choose one or two things. So plant 200 species, and then in a very small period of time, this gives this incredible biodiversity that gives a lot of fruits and things that can be harvested. And this is my question. Because what I really liked about it was the complexity component of it. Because if you you don't try. This is my question. You don't try to design when you do like 200 species. You're not getting like a biologist and trying to design the interactions. You're sort of like throwing a whole bunch of things. But I imagine there's a little bit of design, right? You have to get things that are natural to that system. But then you do it and you step back and see what emerges, right? That is very complexity like it. For most economists, that doesn't make sense. Where economists will say, no, we can't do it like that. Let's optimize. We have to optimize. We have to find the single best combination of 200 seeds to put on this. But that's not how you do it, right? You sort of, because the reason is because there's so many possible interactions, and what you're going for is these interactions, right? That's what I understood from the green tea, right? That a green tea grown in these conditions will be different than a green tea grown only with green tea. And you cannot calculate those interactions beforehand, not even with computers or anything else. So you want to sort of see what emerges. And another component that I thought also has a lot to do with complexity is that there's no equilibrium, right? Because this piece of land is always changing. It's always changing. It's changing. Different things are going to happen. Eventually, maybe when it becomes a big forest or something, there might be an equilibrium. But the interesting part isn't the equilibrium, because in economics, we only want equilibrium. We don't care anything that happens out of equilibrium. But that in real life, the cool things are all in non-equilibrium.
Very interesting to see this feedback from economists working on complex systems. And well, I started rather on physics, but I was also familiar with complex systems approach in economics, but it makes perfect sense. And as you said, it is somehow expected, but not redesigned for a single element to behave rationally. So that's very different from conventional optimization, so whether it be in agronomy or economy. And what I realize is rather kind of evolutionary institution that reside in our body, in our plant's body, or in our ecosystem. So the reason why I can say that is that if there isn't such mutualistic mechanism or economic institution that emerge in our society or in the natural world, they will go extinct. So we don't have life on us now. So the only proof that such a synergistic relationship to be sustained, whether as an institution or as a biomechanical pathway, is that because life exists in this planet. So that's my first point. And maybe I want to hear some stories from the memory of Hirofumi Uzawa, who believed in such possibility of institution and culture at the same time. Maybe he had this idea because he lived in a rural side of Japan, spending his as a college student there or during the war, I don't remember yet. But he had good conversation with local community. And I think you were saying that he had this idea of social common capital in a very primitive form in such a good living community in the rural side of Japan. I mean, there's a limited amount of food all over Japan during the war, but at the city side, we are fighting for the food or for whatever goods that we need to survive. But in the rural side village that Uzawa went to hide, actually, there was a kind of mutual offering, right? And the community was maybe not abundant, but self-sufficient and could survive.
I have a comment on that because I had never heard of common social capital, but when as an economist, when I first thought of commons, right? When you in economics say commons, you think of Eleanor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize in 2009. But then reading some things about common social capital, there's a lot of parallels because the same way you had capitalism and socialism, the story of how she came up with the commons is because economists also always used to say, look, there's a problem of open access or commons or open access. And there's two solutions. One, if there's two solutions. One solution is private property. So if we privatize everything, then you solve the problem because whoever's it is, they'll take care of it. So this is capitalism. The other solution is let the state do it. Let's nationalize it, and then the state will take care of it. And for a long time, economists used to say, well, those are the two solutions. There's nothing in the middle we can take care of. And she got a Nobel Prize for saying, no, wait a minute. Just look at the world. There's all these places in the world where communities have common property. It's not open access, it's common property, which economic theory said this should be a tragedy, and it isn't. Somehow the community, that's more or less what you're talking, the rural side, the community was able to devise, bottom up, spontaneously, emerge some kind of local rules that deal well with the common property. So it's very, there's very strong parallels. And I saw that the book that you put up there was 2007. So she was doing this at the same time as your father. So it's probably one of those things where, great ideas are happening at the same time.
But I mean, like, she was really careful, like, in this kind of system that would work. It can be not just like leave it up and it's gonna. And so that's one thing. I mean, like the scale of the case. Think today in the market of soybeans, for example, without private property, or in, I'm not making up, I mean, like, saying that. Yeah. A bit of a question, like, how do we, and if you think that we should scale this up, or, I mean, like, the idea of or if you think that it's doable, the scaling up of this, or because if you think like there's some kind of crops where are not suitable for this kind of grains or wheat, soybeans, or staple of our, not really think like soybeans in a I mean, like, so how ambitious you are? How can we really think that we should just scale this up, or think that we should like a poverty, lots of deforestation here and there?
A very essential and hard question, and it's also a very interesting part if you go to the field. Of course, there's a lot of difficulties in the real world that you cannot go to Amazon and say, hey, I want to live there to promote biodiversity. No, you are the simple outsider. You not be welcome, for example. But at the same time, it is true that the natives living in Amazonian rainforest do not have access to business institutions, for example. So they are obliged to cut down trees to make their living, for example. But if we have a kind of intermediate institution that connect between this kind of primitive life and urban life, we can actually establish a good cycle, partly promoted by the economic principle, to pay for performance, for example, but to pay for the good performance, not the mutually degrading performance, but synthesizing performance. And I think Professor Shimizu, you worked much on the pay for performance in era of emergency, for example, after the earthquake, and maybe you have good insight on that subject.
Yeah, I think the culture is new issues for us. Maybe we have a few experience. And I have a question, because in Brazil, we have a historically monoculture, and it's so difficult to manage to change this situation. My question is how to engage different actors to change this situation. Brazil is so a big country. We have original people and ribeirinhas, etc., etc. How to manage?
Is there any hint or is there any platform for that? For example, in at the time of immediate rescue, just after the earthquake, for example, we have to get all the effort, regardless of the level of professionality or difficult access to the place, and probably sparse resources and different levels of competencies, even for the professionals being on site. And is there any experience in your project, for example, how you can, it's not optimized, but in a certain way devise heuristically in such a contingency situation out of equilibrium? That was a question.
Thank you. It's enough for me.
Is there any questions from you guys? Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for your lectures today. I'm Jorge Zeredo from the Faculty of Health in Ceilândia. I have a question for Professor Funabashi. You mentioned that in your model, you could of the land, I don't know. Be diverse, right? To promote perfect unit, or according to the environment of each plot of land, you will have different units. It's never going to be that one unit that can be route. That's one question. And another one is, don't you think we need to change our culture of having a staple food that everybody wants to eat and everybody used to eating the same thing all the time? Maybe there will come a time when we need to eat what is available. We eat, or it's probably even healthier if we have a more diverse. What are your opinions on these two points?
Thanks for the excellent question. For the first question, it is true that I'm not trying to propagate the single cell model, replicate, make a perfect copy to dominate the land. Actually, as you said, everyone is different. Just 1 meter sometimes makes difference. And also, it's also the matter of what degree you want to control the vegetation. You can keep this land whether as a grassland or shrubland or a rich forest. It's completely up to you. And having all this spectrum of complexity in our mind, we can actually design or even devise what would be the rich diversity for us and for the environment. And this is a kind of optimization based on the many constraints. And it is very difficult to resolve just by intuition. So that's why I'm going for computer science. So in my presentation, for example, what I showed is the trilemma. So the trade-off of three diversities measured. So one is the diversity of species by itself. So you want to introduce more species as you want. But this should be, as you said, different from the surrounding plot. So this is the diversity of difference. So this is the concept called diversity of difference. Or in professional term, it's called beta diversity, if you can Google it. So it's like, okay, we are Homo sapiens. So we are a single species. But between Brazil and Japanese and other ethnicity, there's slight difference, genetically speaking. So this is diversity of difference, for example. And in a similar way, we can conceive one ecosystem to be maximally different from the other ecosystem. So that's another definition of diversity. So diversity, if you pronounce it, it sounds like one dimension, a simple term, but actually there's a lot of diversity of something, diversity of species, diversity of difference, diversity of interactions, diversity of dynamics. So it's infinite. So the richness on the definition of diversity we have will determine the space that we can explore in the future in the augmented ecosystem. So, for example, agroforestry looks similar to what I'm doing. Of course, there's a significant overlap, but we can also not to choose to make it a forestry. You can choose to make it like a desert, but still be productive as a desert. Yeah, so that may be one direction to answer your question. And the second question is very thoughtful. I mean, if you look at the history of our food system, just like another diversity axis there. So we don't know what is the staple of Homo sapiens actually. We rely on the wheat, for example, in European countries, but on rice for Japanese population. But rice didn't exist in Japan before 2,000 years or 3,000 years. So what we have eaten as a hunter-gatherer are completely different. So the concept of staple is already kind of temporary. When I say temporary, it's like 1,000-year time scale, but it's still temporary compared to our genetic plan that was carved through the course of evolution. It takes 1 million years to establish Homo sapiens. So naturally, what we see as main foods today will be drastically different in the future. And of course, there should be a coupled co-evolution between our digestive system and also the way we produce food and the way we kind of distribute. But I think there's a rich diversity in the future that in 50 years, we may not be eating like today. And yeah, that's that's for sure for me. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Very much for your speech. It was very inspiring. My name is Ivana. I'm a researcher here at the University of Brasília and at the Faculty of Architecture and Urbanism. And I think this topic is very connected to the urbanism issue because we have been facing the climate change, and this is impacting the urban systems. And we have been talking about the nature-based solutions. And this is one of the green infrastructure that we need to build in the cities. In the issue related to disaster reduction, we need to take a different, how can I say, a different look at the cities, because we have to act. We have been facing some climate change, and when we are suffering many. This year, we had the biggest disaster in Brazil registered in the south of Brazil, Rio Grande do Sul. And the way how people are occupying the territory, the spaces, are very wrong. So we need to revert this condition. So I'd like to thank you for your speech, and would like to have this contribution for long term, like Matsuzukuri, like some other issues in Japan, that we have to look 100 years long, not a short, long time, like 10 years. We to consider 10 years long, a long term, but it's not. In Japan, I know you will look for 100 years, 200 years. Thank you very much for your speech. Questions? Just a comment.
Make a comment on that, because it's interesting that you mentioned cities, because while reading on this subject, it came to my mind Jane Jacobs, because Jane Jacobs' approach to cities, it's a very complexity approach, because her thing was cities work well when you have a lot of diversity. She said eyeballs on the street, where you have a lot of people, and the same neighborhood has like different functions at different time of the day. Her example of that not working was Wall Street, because Wall Street only, it was all during some hours you had one type of person, then nobody. So then you'd have crime and everything. But Greenwich Village, you have people in the morning, people, and you have, she even recommended to have old buildings. It's very important to have old buildings. Why do you want old buildings? New buildings are better than old buildings. No, when you have old buildings, you can have poorer people living there. This is the 60s. Today, no poor people live in Manhattan, of course, but in the 60s, old buildings, because then you have poor people, rich people, all types of people. And it's sort of like his land, where you have all these species and these interactions pop up. So it has very much the same feel. And just on that, and another person who wrote about, has to do with your question, James Scott, the political scientist from Yale. He has a book called Against the Grain, because his idea monoculture arose in the Neolithic Revolution, and it was actually a step backwards in terms of nutrition, because it was less nutritious than what hunter-gatherers used to have. But what pushed for it was that, because then governments could arise and tax, because grains are easy to tax, easy to measure. You can't measure hunted and collected food. And then, so it's interesting also that he has a book where he criticizes Brasilia a lot. He says Brasilia is the example of the worst city in the world, because it's an attempt to make a garden where you plan everything. And I met him in Indiana when I was there for a while. And I said to him, that's true. Originally, Brasilia was really bad, but Brasilia is just like your garden. It didn't go according to plan. I don't know if you had time to go around Brasilia, but Brasilia is like a garden that was supposed to be perfectly trimmed and exact little fence, but then they turned their backs for a few years and it grew organically. thank God, it's much better this way than if it had gone according to plan.
Can I add something? That's a very interesting remark to me that before coming here, okay, this is the first time in Brazil, I didn't know anything. The only knowledge I had is the capital of Brazil is Brasilia. That I learned in my high school, but nothing else. And then I thought, okay, I arrived just a few days ago, and with Marie, we went around just at the city center. So there's Independence Day and the parade, and we look at the very stylish buildings and so on. But before going out, I thought, okay, this is more like Le Corbusier's ideal city. This is the ego of Niemeyer. So in the sense of Hirofumi Uzawa's social common capital, it may be a bit brutal because the cars are dominating, the traffic would dominate, and we pedestrians would be kind of threatened. So I thought I may not like it, but actually, when I went out, there's a beautiful curve, and of course the cars are still violent, but it's following a certain rhythm and certain curvature according to Niemeyer, it's a woman's body. I don't know if this is why I liked it, but anyway, it was not that oppressive that I thought. And your comment as a part of my discordance is that it was not completely as it was planned, actually. So there's a kind of initial planning, and this was, of course, this included lots of components that cannot be just completely planned harmful cities for vulnerable people, but also there's the kind of natural selection, natural evolution that was viable and possible. At the same time, that provided certain comfort, which is at the same time maintaining the futuristic scenery, but I would say certain comfort kind of really complex place for me. And maybe, Maria, you have some comment on that.
For my father, hate Corbusier's architecture, but there are beautiful
cultural or traditional historical heritage is probably making a part of cultural context that would, I don't know, certain sense, give emergence to the institution probably. That we cannot really expect that. Yeah.
Can I ask one question myself? I was very impressed by the numbers you showed with this African experiment. It seems that it's a huge success. And my question is it pulverizing? Everybody wants to do it. All governments are looking for you to do it, or is there something that's in the way of duplicating it?
Yeah, actually, thanks for this question that sometimes people don't ask such question because they simply don't believe it. And the answer is there are people who want to adopt it and enthusiastically, and those who don't believe it. Certain sense because it's out of the conventional conception, or they just don't believe it until they see the real farm on site. Or just the huge problem in Africa, there's the competency. There are lots of illiterate people that we cannot really communicate by writing. So I speak French. My second language is French, so I do my seminar in French. But even for this so-called French-speaking country population, it's only the upper class who would speak fluent French. And other people have strong accent, or I have strong accent, according to them. It's kind of really difficult to communicate without really make them live in the real situation. And other barrier is that there are a lot of, let's say, jealousy or people who don't want to see the other having success. And I think that that's very strong in Sahel countries from my personal experience. And it's almost as much as in Japan, so I can say that. So there's a huge complexity of interaction, social interaction between people that, in a sense, relativize the situation. So you cannot go in a single direction massively. We cannot be like a fanatic of a new religion. So that's giving reasonable feedback, of course. But at the same time, if there's really working significant cases backed up with science, people don't believe it. And if you look at the European history of science, it's the same thing, actually. We did know that vitamin C is vital for our health, which the Portuguese, when they came here, they didn't have this knowledge, so many people died of the lack of vitamin C. But although it was known clinically, the army didn't employ it for like 60 years or so. And that's our perception. And I'm at the same time struggling, but enjoying much about this human psychology. Yeah.
Do you have plans for Brazil?
This time it's just a 2-week stay, so I don't think I can implement something, but I'm discovering a lot regarding the situation near here, for example. I've come to learn that there's a forest fire, a shrub fire, of course. So maybe one idea is to take care of the Cerrado, not necessarily Amazon rainforest, but there's actually ecological transition between rainforest and Cerrado. Without even human intervention, there's such natural transition, and it's been studied with ecological model. And we have this degradation of rainforest, degradation of Cerrado, that could be mutually approached from my perspective. So I'd be very happy if I can meet relevant stakeholders and decide the project. Yeah, why not?
Are there other questions? And I think the only obstacle between you and coffee break. So I would like to invite Ambassador Teiji Hayashi to say the final words so we can finish this session and enjoy more leisurely talks over the coffee. Please.
Just I'd like to thank all the speakers and the participants here in this conference. It was very fruitful and good discussion we had here about the social common capital. From my point of view, social common capital is quite a really necessary concept for Brazilian society today, where we have a lot of conflict between the poor people, rich people, environment issues, social issues, and so on, so on. Social common capital is a kind of idea to share really common property, common value within the society. So for example, taking care of the environment, biodiversity, healthcare system is not only a job for the government. It should be shared by people, managed by people, for better society. That is in my understanding, that is the essence of the Professor Uzawa. And it should be a part of the also economics in that sense. So I think I hope this conference was a good opportunity for all of you here and also participants who online to have more in-depth thought about this the key issue, social common capital in Brazil. And the as ambassador and our embassy is also in a good position to continue this kind of discussions and the cooperation with Brazilian people. Anyway, thank you very much for today for your participation. Arigato.
Let's then close the session and thank everyone who is here in person and everybody who is watching this over the internet. Thank you again, Ambassador Hayashi, Professor Funabashi, Urabe, Marcelo, Bernardo, Elena. Let's continue talking over a coffee. Thank you.